Welcome to Plugged In. This is our fourth episode. I'm Trystan, and as always, I am joined by my co-host Alex. And today we have a very special guest. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Dante. I sing and play in a band called Vague Advice.
So today we're going to be talking to Dante about Vague Advice's upcoming EP. It's going to be released next Friday, I believe.
Yep, next Friday.
So
21st.
That will be the 21st of April, 2017. Dante, would you like to give us a little bit of background on the band?
Yeah, absolutely. We're from a small town called Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania. It's right outside of Philadelphia. We've been playing for about 5 years now. A few of the members were in an old band we used to play together back in high school. And yeah, we've just been playing songs for a few years now. We've recorded one full length called If We Ever Come Back Down over at Timber Studios in New Jersey. That's sort of also a concept record similar to this one. It's a lot less straightforward. But yeah, we just pull from all sorts of influences in the alternative genre, the ever broad alternative genre. A lot of emo bands, a lot of math rock bands, post rock bands, and we just sort of try and make songs that we would want to hear. Try not to put too much pressure on ourselves about what genre our music's going to be, and we sort of just bring songs to the table and we just start to build on them, and whatever happens.
That's awesome. Yeah, one thing I think that always interests me about bands' creative process is whether they start with the concepts and themes of the lyrics, or they start with more of the music and the songwriting ideas. How does that work for you guys?
Yeah, so something that I really, really like and appreciate about the way we write is that, we've only recorded two releases thus far, but thus far the writing processes have been completely different, and I want to sort of keep up that trend for our future releases. So for our first album, it was sort of mix and match. The way it would work is usually one or two people would write a song in its entirety. There were a couple songs where, I wrote the guitar and the vocals and the lyrics for a song, and then I brought it to the table, and our drummer, bassist, and guitarist, their names are Chris, Austin, and Jeff, respectively, and they would just I would play the songs over and over and over again until we had an idea, and they would start to build around those songs. And a couple other songs, maybe Austin and Jeff would have something together, and they'd have a full song, and they'd bring that song to the table, and we'd do the same thing. And for another song, Jeff and Chris would have drums and guitar would have a full song, and so on and so forth. So one or two people would bring something almost in its entirety to the table, and everyone else would sort of write their parts around that. And in terms of the concept behind it and the lyrics behind it, the story was sort of built after we had written the songs, which is reflective of my songwriting process in general. Usually, I just sort of let my subconscious do all the legwork. I'll just sit down and just have at it and start writing lyrics, and with no sort of core theme in mind, and afterwards I'll go back and say, oh, that's what this song is about. That makes a lot of sense. And that's generally how I write all of my songs, but that sort of happened at the larger scale as well. Those songs were all written within their own respect. And then maybe two or three of the songs I realized, oh, wait a second, there's a story here. And I sort of identified that story, and maybe two or three songs out of the 10 songs on that album were thought directly, okay, how do we make these songs sort of reflect the story and bring some closure and cohesiveness to the story. So for this new EP, it happened a little bit differently. The concept was there before I wrote the songs, and the concept for the EP is actually a concept that I intend to write a collection of short stories about as well. And so I don't know if I want to get too deep into the concept now, just for the sake of answering your question more directly, but I sort of knew what the concept was. There were three characters, and I knew that each character would have two songs each. And I had the basic outline, basic structure of that concept and that collection of short stories already outlined. So I just sort of wrote those songs as a sort of soundtrack to those stories. And then similarly to If We Ever Come Back Down, that's when I brought those songs to the rest of the band, and they began writing their instruments around them. I hope that effectively answers that. I know that was a pretty long answer.
Oh, no, yeah. Yeah, I think the concept itself is very interesting in that it ties together like 3 different timelines, as you said. So you can go ahead if you want and just sort of summarize for our listeners who haven't maybe listened yet what the general concept is and just how you think these 3 sort of timelines intersect.
Yeah, absolutely. So they intersect in a pretty fantastical way. It's a pretty out there story. The core themes tend to be religion, time travel, and nuclear apocalypse, as they're separated by the timelines. So if we start, I always go back and forth on whether I should tell the story chronologically, past, present, future, or in terms of like the relevance of the story. That's the hard part. I'm still sort of working out and what makes the most sense. But essentially, the present time story deals with nuclear apocalypse, which I think is appropriate given our political, I guess, climate, which is actually funny. I began writing these short stories way before any of this crazy shit started happening. But
right.
But it's about a guy named James, and he's sort of a solipsist. He's in his own head. He exists in his own head, and he has a partner with whom he's been able to sort of participate in the world outside of his own psyche. And the sort of present time story tells the story of James and his partner Tallulah in the last couple of days of the pre-apocalyptic world. And it takes a interesting perspective on the apocalypse. In the story, sort of tensions have been rising, political tensions have been rising, and international tensions have been rising. So everyone's sort of prepared for this and been prepared for this for a couple years. So the world isn't in this sort of state of chaos you would expect, given the impending apocalypse. But essentially what's happening in the framework of those stories is that, a couple people are throwing end-of-the-world parties, and everyone's just sort of living out the rest of their days in peace because they know any day now things are going to end. So the first song, From the City Towards the Hills, sort of focuses on that, and it's just James sort of reflecting with his partner and with his friends on the eve of the apocalypse, and sort of recounting a history of human folly and all the ways that we went wrong, all the ways that he's gone wrong, and just what humanity has come to, and where they are at that given point. And then boom, apocalypse happens, everyone blows up, and then the next song for James, which is The Things Themselves. Now these are the 2 songs that have been released from the EP thus far, From the City Towards the Hills and The Things Themselves. And The Things Themselves focuses more on James, and this one is where it gets a little bit weird and trippy and meta. But in this story, James is sort of in the post-apocalyptic world, and he's sort of roaming around, sort of sleeping in caves that were once cities, and he has devoted the rest of his life now to developing the means to discover time travel, to go back in time and prevent the apocalypse. Now, James wants to go back in time and prevent the apocalypse because he wants to go back in time and save his partner, Tallulah, who has died in the apocalypse. However, myself, the writer, wants James to develop time travel to give me a good story to write. I want him to discover time travel so that I can tell the story of the development of time travel. And I use the guise of I want him to do it to go back and prevent the apocalypse and save the world, right? Because that's the good story. So whereas I want that story to unfold as James developing time travel, or developing the means for time travel. He just wants to go back and save Tallulah. So that story is all about me and James butting heads. It's sort of a writer versus character sort of conflict, where there are actual interactions in the short stories. There are actual interactions between me and the character, and I guess in the song there is too. There's a line that says, "You're not a god, you're a man with a pen, so fix your own mess." Right? He doesn't want to do what I want him to do. He wants to do what he wants to do, because even though I'm just sort of using him to tell a story, he in himself is a character and has a life. Hopefully after explaining that story, you guys don't think that I'm a psychopath and you would like to continue this podcast. But those are those two stories. So that's the present time. It's sort of the apocalypse and James saying, okay, let's go back in time and prevent the apocalypse, albeit a bit conflicted. I'll try and make the rest of my blurbs a little bit shorter. Again, I'm still trying to find the line about how to most effectively explain these stories. So fast forward X amount of years, I'm not completely sure. We're in the future, and time travel has been developed. Finally, there's this sort of post-apocalyptic, anarchic, utopian society, and this one is sort of becomes a little bit more political in terms of I wanted to explore different ways of seeing. Explore different ways of how we construct society in our heads, what we consider society to be, and how it operates. But essentially, it's an anarchic society. But there is a sort of governmental presence, and that's the organization of which the two main characters in the future are a part. And one character, Marcus, is... Christopher, is sort of the figurehead for leading society. There's no penal system, he's not in charge of anything, but it's sort of a libertarian socialist society, if you're familiar with that. It's not sort of all-powerful, but it sort of makes sure that things go smoothly and that society operates. And Christopher's in charge of that. Christopher's a descendant of James, the last remaining descendant who was alive, and he's sort of in charge of sort of making sure things run smoothly. The main character, Vincent, is his counterpart, but he's sort of more focused on developing time travel, which is the one goal around which all of society has now been organized because of James. So everyone is sort of invested, and that's why this anarchic society is operating so smoothly, because even though no one has to, everyone wants to be participating in this one goal. It's funny, it's actually built around a conversation that Chris, our drummer, and I had years ago, sitting on a porch, not completely sober, and he says to me, could you imagine what would happen if all 7 billion people in the world were working towards one goal? And ever since, I had been sort of fascinated with what he said, and that sort of strongly influenced the structure of this society, and all these people are sort of participating. But essentially, the plan is to send Christopher's DNA back in time to teach the world that love and compassion and are all more important than power. That these are the things that everyone should be focusing on. And as we later find out, that person is Jesus Christ. Has the person we know is Jesus Christ, the historical figure, the fictional figure, whatever you believe. And that's the past story that we'll get into. But essentially, in the future, it's sort of a back and forth between whether or not they should actually do it. Now that they have time travel, Christopher is like, this has always been the plan. Let's go back and save the world. And Vincent's like, I don't know. Our world is kind of perfect. Why would we want to go back and change this, right? Why would we want to get rid of this? We've done it. This is the thing that we could ultimately hope for the old world to have become. And it's sort of back and forth about whether it's a good idea. But alas, they send Jesus back in time. And that is the past story, and it takes a new perspective on the figure that we generally conceive to be Jesus Christ. This is where it gets a little tricky. I try not to be too offensive. I am personally not a Christian, and so this fictional take on Jesus Christ, I'm hoping, doesn't sort of push Christians away from the story because it's less of a, an insult, although a lot of it can be a bit blasphemous, if you will, and more of a sort of, hey, let's look at this from a different fictional angle, because oftentimes when we look at things through the lens of fiction, we can actually see them maybe more truthfully, but I don't want to get too deeply into that. But the two songs about Jesus Christ, one of them is sort of Jesus Christ as we know Jesus Christ to be, right? This sort of compassionate figure. It's Jesus Christ fulfilling his mission, teaching the world, and sharing his doctrine of love and compassion. The other one is a not as traditional story in which Jesus is a young boy, and he's sort of questioning and doubting his purpose and angry at his father, Christopher, for abandoning him and sending him to this place that he kind of hates, with people that he kind of hates, to save these people, right? Not only does he have to live with these people, but he's tasked with the responsibility to die for these people, and he's angry about that. And so he's questioning his purpose. So all in all, those are the sort of stories that make up the EP, and the fun part is that it tugs on this sort of eternal recurrence. Going back into the future story, it sort of actually I don't want to give the ending. I don't know if the ending will be as you can hear, it's a rather like complex interwoven story that may not necessarily be picked up just by listening to the songs, which is why I'm grateful for the opportunity to be on this podcast and explain that story, and which is why on our Bandcamp we'll be having blurbs about each story and the story as a whole, so that people can sort of follow along, because I think once you have the sort of story and you know the story and you listen to the songs, you say, oh, that makes sense, but I'm not completely sure that we might find the story otherwise. But all the same, I'd rather not give away more than I already have. Again,
sure. Yeah, that's definitely understandable.
Sure.
I did have one quick question before we move on, though.
Mm-hmm.
You picked the two James songs as the singles. For a concept record like this, how do you go about selecting the singles?
Yeah, it was a lot less thought out than you might imagine. We released the things themselves first because we recorded the things themselves first. We recorded the things themselves. Sorry, I got something stuck in the back of my throat. We recorded the things themselves in Minor Street Recordings in Philadelphia back in, I want to say, June or July, and we were just sitting on it for a while. We've been working on this EP for writing the songs and recording them for quite some time now, and we recorded that song with a different studio than we recorded the rest of the songs. So we had it for a while, and our bass, sort of however small, we've been telling them about this EP for a while. It's coming, and it just got to a point where the timeline got pushed back so far, and we thought, okay, we should release a song now, and that was the one that we had finished. So we released the things themselves with recorded with Minor Street Studios, and we recorded Filial Piety, Absent Father, on our own. We tracked and mixed that. It's an acoustic song, so we did that by ourselves. Jeff produced that, and that was mastered by Canon Sound Foundation. Sorry, it's a tricky name. I always get it confused in my head. But and that's who we recorded the rest of the EP with. So the only song that we really decided, okay, which song should we release second, was From the City Towards the Hills. And despite the coincidence that they are the two songs that revolve around the same character, that actually had little to nothing to do with our decision to release it. It was kind of like, this is one of our favorite, that's not the title track. It's one of the really, really solid ones that's not necessarily our favorite one. So it was more sort of like it was more circumstantial than anything, the two songs that we decided to release.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. That might not be the answer that I was hoping for. I thought maybe there would be this like mind-blowing, reason why you were like, oh yeah, people need to know the James story before anything else.
That would be super cool, but I mean, I guess it's sort of panned out that that does play a factor. We ordered the EP such that the story would sort of create that sort of ebb and flow, and that there would be kind of an arc to it. And that said, From the City Towards the Hills is the first song on the EP, and then The Things Themselves is the third song on the EP. So I think the way that we released it does sort of still tug at the arc that the story does have, right? And it sort of does tie back into the idea of like, I don't know if I want to say too much, that part, the order of the EP and consequently the order of the release does sort of preserve that sort of story arc there as well. So while it may not have been very intentional, there is a little bit of that going on.
Right. I think going back a little bit, one thing that really interests me is how you mentioned that you had started writing these ideas like quite a while ago, and yet it sort of took on this new relevance with the election and what's followed it. Like, right. One thing that always fascinates me is when artists of any, like, regardless of whether it's writing, poetry, music, film, you sort of accidentally, or not accidentally, but you sort of touch on something that you feel is relevant and is personal to you and is important, and then it ends up being more relevant than you could even imagine within the span of when it's actually released or shortly after. And I think that can sort of speak to art's ability to sort of touch on the sort of maybe what we haven't even consciously realized yet without getting too like deep into it. Like, we can sort of almost through art realize things that we may not be consciously aware of yet.
Yeah, dude, I agree with that 100%, and I think that's part of why art is so incredibly valuable and so incredibly important. And honestly, it's why I'm pissed at myself, right? The writer's bug, dude. Like, this EP was... The original plan was, I've been telling people I've been writing a composite novel for a few years now. And the original plan was to release the short stories or the composite novel, which is a collection of short stories that reads like a novel. The plan was to release it with this EP, or at least a little bit before this EP. And if I would have not been such a scumbag or a lazy piece of shit, and if I would have written those stories, and if everything would have gone as planned and gone to schedule with this EP, the EP doesn't touch on the political side as much as the short stories does, but the short story sort of focuses on, and From the City Towards the Hills, it gives that little background about the rising tensions, and sort of it frames sort of the U.S. versus U.S. and, of course, the traditional allies versus China and Russia and Iran, and it talks about those things before shit was hitting the fan the way it is. Do you know how, famous I could have become? Well, no, I'm kidding, but, like, that of course is not as important as, like, it's sort of the things that you said, right? This sort of this ability to sort of tug at these profound topics that are more relevant than we even realize, and the fact that I had an opportunity, I called something and I totally blew it, right? Which is okay. Right, sometimes you lose, but just an example is like, yeah, I sort of was on the brink of like exactly what you were talking about, and I missed it a little bit, but the fact that we're releasing this now, hopefully some people can connect it to what's going on now, because I like to think that there are certain parts of in ways I try to avoid making too many statements or too much of a statement, but there is a little bit of, hey guys, we kind of fucked up, where did we go wrong, right? And I think that given the political climate and the social climate that we're in, hopefully people can take one or two things out of this EP and apply it to that, and hopefully they can see it through a slightly different lens that's helpful when constructing their own personal reality.
I think in a way that's really important, what you just said. I feel like if an artist makes too strong of a statement, it can almost be a little off-putting, because I think part of a relationship between artist and listener is that you kind of meet the listener or consumer halfway, in that they take some of the message that you put in it, and yet they also add some of their own meaning to it.
Right, exactly.
So if it was just entirely like you know, not shoving your message down their throats, but, you know, like just full on, just like messages that are super direct, super specific, it would maybe like not age very well. It would maybe, you know, not necessarily impact as many people.
Very much so, exactly.
Transitioning from that, you mentioned that in the future narrative, the son of the character Christopher actually ends up being Jesus.
Right.
And I think it's very interesting that you tackled that subject from a non-religious point of view, because I'm also not very religious, and yet I think that doesn't mean we should ignore that part of history and ignore the historical figure that Jesus was, because the fact that this person is still so relevant thousands of years later, I think speaks to their impact at the time. And you sort of see the two sides of it, where it's either like very devoutly religious Christians who fully embrace every aspect of Jesus, you know, good or bad, or on the other side you have atheists who like just ignore, who are just like, you know, that person isn't important at all. Mm-hmm. And I think tackling that sort of middle ground is very important. So would you say that like having Jesus in the story makes it somewhat of like a religious allegory in a sense?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It's sort of like you said, the fact that it's happened, I mean, arguably, right? We're not in history. I guess there are different perspectives on that too. But the fact that it's such a powerful part of our society makes it such that I can't possibly bring Jesus into this story without it having that sort of allegorical weight to it, right? There's no way to get away with saying nothing about religion by introducing this character into the narrative. So I would very much agree with that. And sort of religion recurs throughout all of the stories, and again, a little bit more so in the stories, but also in the songs a little bit as well. But for James, in the present time period, from the city towards the hills, in the short story, he sort of goes back and forth. There's a part where he's talking to his father, who is, of course, dead, but he's sort of having this sort of, I don't know, a dream, or where he's talking to his father or something like that. And he's sort of arguing with his father, who is religious, and, you know, James is an atheist, and they just have this back and forth about his religious father, and being upset with him about always, you know, calling them stupid or calling them out for how silly he thinks religion is. So that story touches on religion in that way. In the things themselves, it sort of touches on religion as well, jumping back to that whole dialogue between character and writer. Sort of that hinges on this concept as writer as God, right? As writers, when we create a story, there are sort of inextricable parallels between a writer and the writer's characters to a God and its universe, right? Or at least a conscious God and its universe. And that sort of tugs at religion as well. And I'm purposely tugging at some parallels there between my interactions with James, or James's interactions with me, and how sort of people interact with their God. And that talks about religion in that way. And then I try to spin religion in several different ways in terms of the relationship of the God and the people that believe in the God, and it sort of creates this interest. In one of the songs, it says, "Son of James, do you fancy yourself a god?" Right? Because it creates this sort of, if we believe that Jesus is the Son of God, in this scenario, Christopher is kind of like God, right? So it talks about that, and this guy who's rather capricious and rather full of himself and his position and his role in society, and it sort of looks at that and the narratives about gods that we have, and how he fits into that. And so there are all of these different sorts of points in the story that tackle religion in that way and look at it from several, so sort of like you said, several different angles, whether that be irreligious, a statement about religion, the perspectives of a religious person, because I do come from a religious background, and I wanted to tackle some of the things that I once believed and sort of explore the different perspectives and how that perspective has changed as well. But to go back more directly to your question, whether you're taking a religious perspective or a non-religious perspective or an anti-religious perspective, by bringing this character into the story, I try to jump into all of those roles and say a little bit of something about each of those. And I tried to do a little bit about each of them so as to not make too much of a statement and to more so make a survey. Look at all these perspectives. Not going to tell you which one's mine, but check these out.
I think from your summary, you definitely did, at least as it seems right now, it seems like you're, covering all three of those in a very respectful manner without offending anybody, but me being somebody who is also not very religious, but from a religious background, I don't find offense in it, and, I don't think others should find offense in it, but, you never know.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think that I'm usually better at, like, sort of explaining things when I have a second to sit back and sort of like conceptualize the words I'm saying before I say them, and that I don't think that's done as much in the songs or the stories, which is ironic because I certainly had some time to think about those. But I on the other hand do think some people will be offended. I think there is some really, really blasphemous stuff in there, but I mean, if people can sort of look past it to sort of see what I'm saying, because you sort of have to, or at least in this case, I sort of had to make these really sort of sharp points in order to get the message across. And I think some of those will unfortunately offend people. I'm hoping it won't, and I'm hoping that they can try and hear and see what we're saying with the songs, but I guess we'll see. I'm glad though that you don't think that will happen. I certainly hope that you're right.
I mean, I like to hope that people can look at it with eyes, and not take it as, I mean, even if they take it as blasphemous, at least be like, okay, for the narrative concept.
For sure.
This is how he kind of was, guided into approaching it, instead of, you just being like, oh, I'm gonna blaspheme just to blaspheme.
Right, right. I'm just here to piss some people off. Right, for sure.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like we do live in like a time where there is so much polarization on both sides. Like I feel like sometimes that message the bigger message of things gets lost amidst, like, for lack of a better word, people's like desire to basically either be mad about something, be offended, or just find something that they can pick apart and like turn it into something negative. So hopefully that your actual narrative wins out and not just the little details that aren't even the main focus.
For sure.
So going back a little bit away from the concept and more onto the band, how do you guys perform much, or like?
Yeah, we do. We're finally starting to pick it back up. When we released If We Ever Come Back Down, we were playing. We got to a point where we were playing 2 shows a week, which was cool. It's not as glamorous as it seems. You realize when you're building a bass and starting out, that's not actually the best way to go, right? Because we were playing venues as well. So it's tough to have ask the same 5, 10, at best 15 people. He's like, hey, I know you just came out last night, but come hear the same songs again tonight, right? But we're playing quite a bit back then. And then we took, honestly, almost a year off of shows just to work on this EP and to record this EP. And now that it's done, we're picking back up, and we're trying to be a bit smarter about the shows that we play. We're playing fewer venue shows, and when we do play venue shows, we're trying to focus on higher profile venue shows. And right now, we're just sticking to house shows, man. We should have been playing house shows the whole time, man. They're so much fun. People are there, and they want to hear the music. No matter what band they showed up to see, they're always interested in hearing the other bands and hanging out, and it's really just like a party and a show all in one, which I think is super cool. It's all ages, and everyone gets to hang out. So we've been doing a lot more of that, and it's already more effective. More people after the show are sort of still continue to be engaged with the music and with our Facebook page and our Bandcamp than, say, people who went to see their friend's band at the Voltage Lounge and actually did like us and actually did groove, but never really followed up. So this is turning out to be a lot better for us just because of the nature of the show, the type of show that it is. In addition to we're not playing as much intentionally. So we're trying to schedule out to a show once every 4 weeks, once every 6 weeks, so that people can come out and it's fresh again. They're not coming out every week to hear the same songs. Enough time has passed that people, want to come back out and want to come see us. In addition to the fact that in that time span, we may have accumulated 2 or 3 more fans that, will actually come out to the show. So each time it's a little bit bigger, a little bit better.
Going off that, this is From the City Toward the Hills by Vague Advice.
words we spoke at dinner parties ringing in my ear. It's hard to believe the way we wasted our disease. But
I know Trystan has put on a few house shows here in California, and I've been to like one or two, and it's always an interesting experience. It's always like just a great atmosphere, and especially like you said, compared to like venue shows where sometimes people are just there to see one band and then leave, basically. Like it's like you're there for the entire experience, the entire night, basically. And I think it just creates that much more of like a communal atmosphere.
Yeah, very much. We definitely see how scenes are built through house shows. Because not to, when I was talking about it before and say, how people sort of like aren't as interested, I'm not sort of like casting anything on those people, because we were actually really bad at that as well. Getting started on venue shows, we admittedly oftentimes, we would leave, after our set. When we were first starting out and we were sort of immature about, what it realistically takes to be in a band and how important community actually is, we were really, really bad at being part of a scene. And I think 75% of that was us, but 25% of that was the experience of a venue show and building a scene through venue shows. Yeah, it was probably more like 90-10, but I'll give us the benefit of the doubt and say 75-25. But playing house shows, we feel so much more naturally connected to a lot of the bands that we're playing with. More of the bands, at least. There were bands when we were playing venue shows that we also did feel really connected with and became our friends. Bands like Brocklanders, and a few bands in the South Jersey scene. But playing these house shows, it tends to be that we're meeting more bands that are similar to us and whose music we're actually genuinely like super, super into and would listen to on our own time, not just because we're playing shows with them. And it just like you said, it just really feels a lot more communal, and it's been easier for us to grow and work on the shortcomings that we had as a band in terms of sort of participating appropriately in that scene.
Seeing as how you guys are, more small-time local band, I just want to know, like, with the whole, having to actually have, like, a life and not doing this for a living, like, how far do you want to take this? I mean, like, are you, do you guys have plans to, eventually take this to a touring act, or, like, even, like, small tours, like, not national, across the country, gone 9 months out of the year type thing.
Yeah, for sure. We're definitely in it for that. We know how hard it is to build a career in music, but we're definitely willing to take that on. We're hopefully planning a tour for this summer, but a short tour. It'll be our first tour. We haven't toured yet. But in the long run, that is something we see as a part of our future in terms of making this our full-time career. I'm currently working in a coffee shop, which I really, really love. I think it's really awesome. But I have a degree in English literature, and I have some experience in the nonprofit world. And all of those things are really, really important to me as well. And I want to do things. So it's cool. It's sort of like I really love my backup plan because music is my number one goal in life. It's the thing more than anything else that I want to be my career. But I also want to be a writer. But I also want to continue working in the nonprofit world. I want to start a nonprofit, and there's so many things that I want to do that can give me a more sustainable income than music while we're building it. And these are things that once I do build a sustainable income playing music, I sort of want to keep a part of my life. I intend to open up a coffee shop that has lots of community elements to it. I'm hoping that it'll also be a venue. There's a really cool place in Westchester, Pennsylvania, where I went to college and where our drummer Chris goes to college, called Fenario's Coffee. It's now called Fen's Coffee, but that sort of inspired the idea behind the coffee shop venue that I want to open up. But also, Jeff and I have talked about starting a label and starting a recording studio. So we have our hands in sort of all sorts of baskets. I don't know if that's the correct idiom. I may have just made that up. But I don't really know. But we are interested in doing a lot of things, but all of those things in one way or another revolve around music, and hopefully revolve around the music that our band makes as well.
I think
it's
it's
really
great.
cool. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Alex, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I think it's great to diversify in that way. Like I'm also trying to get my degree in English and journalism hopefully soon.
Nice.
So I can definitely relate to that. And just trying to balance different passions is always a fun challenge.
For sure.
Because like I'm trying to do, for example, like a podcast, and then like have a degree as like an actual journalist, hopefully get a job in that. So it's always interesting to try to have multiple things, like, and what you want to do as a full-time career isn't necessarily what's going to enable you to have a living. So it's kind of trying to find that balance.
Exactly.
You definitely have a lot of passions that, you can find that nice, hopefully find that nice, balancing point where you can do everything that you want to do,
For
and
sure.
live the happiest life that you can.
Yeah, that's sort of the goal. I actually think about this like really often while I'm walking to work. If I can make it so that, we have the label and we have the recording studio and we're putting out records and the coffee shop itself is a coffee shop. It allows me to sort of like really, really limit my income for each of those things, but so that together they build up to create this really sustainable income, so that this way I can be making a lot of money and not feel like shit because I'm not making it through, like, I don't have to sell out with our music, or I don't have to charge, college kids a ton of money for their coffee, and I can, have bands play and not really take too much of their cut and give them their money. So if things work out the way I want them to work out, which is of course always easier said than done, then I can like look at all of these different things and say, okay, how do I ethically operate these organizations or these businesses so that I'm doing all these things in a way that allows me to sleep at night, so that I can take as little money from it as possible, but that I can afford to do that because there are so many things that we're doing, right? So that when they all add up, I can actually feed my family and sort of to have a sustainable income, while also sort of operating these I don't know, businesses or organizations more or less ethically. Well, that's definitely more ethically. I don't know why I said more or less ethically, but yeah.
Well, it sounds like it might have been a little bit of a Freudian slip.
Yeah. It's like this podcast is the perfect time to hook everyone into my businesses, and then I'll fuck them all.
Definitely. Oh,
Well,
go ahead.
speaking of different things that you have planned, do you guys have any specific shows or upcoming dates that we should know about?
Yeah, absolutely. April 21st, the day that the EP releases, in Philadelphia, we will be playing an EP release show. So we'll be playing the EP in its entirety for the first time at Planet Fitness. I don't know if I said that. Not to be confused with the very popular gymnasium chain, Planet Fitness with a PH Fitness. It's a nice little house venue in Philadelphia that we've played before. We played a cover show there. We did a brand new set, which was really, really fun. So we wanted to work with those guys again for the EP release show. And that is, again, April 21st. Really, really excited about that. We'll be playing that with our very good friends in Twin Sister, which is a great band, sort of like emo, math rock, really, really great guys. And line leader, who I haven't listened to as much, but from what I've heard, they sound really good. And they're also comprised of a couple people who are just really great people. So I'm excited to play with those two bands, and that's gonna be a good time. I'm excited. It'll be the first time a lot of the songs from the EP are actually played in front of people. So I'm really excited about that. But yeah, that's the only show that we have scheduled right now, just because we just, like I said, we're only doing about one a month right now, and we wanted to sort of invest everything into this show and just build up for the EP so that, you know, people can come out and hear the show, and that day the EP is available and it'll be on their minds, and they'll be more likely to download that and stay involved and stay interested.
And you guys will be live streaming that on your Facebook page, correct?
Yes, that's the plan. We didn't announce that yet, but now's as good a time as any. We probably should have announced it sooner. Yeah, we will be live streaming that entire show on Facebook.
Wonderful. And even though you guys are just about to drop an EP, you did say that it had been cooking for a while. So are there any plans for follow-ups, you know, not necessarily in the concept, but, you know, vague advice releases?
Yeah, for sure. We've been fighting the urge. Let's just say that we love writing these songs, and let's say the recording this EP taught us a lot about practicing to a metronome. So we've just introduced that into our practices. So we wanted to really make sure we have these songs all the way down, near perfect, if not perfect, before we moved on to playing other songs during our practice sessions. But every practice session will just jam out, and our jams are sounding better than they ever have. We're playing together off the cusp more creatively than we ever have, and making some really cool stuff. So once we are at a point where we feel comfortable, with the songs that we're playing now from this EP, we're definitely going to turn those jams into a second LP, third release second LP, which is the plan of another full length after this EP. And I mentioned earlier that every album has a different writing process, and that's definitely going to be the case with this one. For the first time, it'll be our first release that is not a concept record, is not a concept EP. We're going to avoid having a sort of cohesive story to it. There might be sort of underlying themes that happen throughout, but it won't have a sort of literary structure. And the writing process for these songs, they will majority be songs that we just sort of start jamming out in practice. Like I mentioned, historically, one or two people have brought a song to the table, and then we'll build on that. But I really want this second LP to be songs that we all just sort of write at the same time, because, like I mentioned, those sort of moments in our practice sessions sound better than they ever have before. And honestly, as much as I love these songs in the EP, kind of seem like our best stuff that we've ever written before, and they're not even being written. So that for me, and I've talked about this with the band as well, and we seem to be on the same page. That's generally the plan for the next release. In terms of a timeline, I have no idea when that release might. The original plan was to start writing LP2 songs while or a little bit before we were recording, and record it maybe a couple months after the EP. But the timeline sort of happened such that might not be the best idea for us. So we're going to take a little bit more time. We're not completely sure when that'll be, but we don't want to wait too long to get some more music out there for people.
Definitely. Alex, do you have anything to add in?
No, I think it's really good plan, and I'm glad you guys are focusing on the EP itself, because I know that must have been a very arduous process with the story being so interconnected and everything tying together. So congratulations on the release, and thank you guys.
Yeah, man. Thank you guys so much for having me on this podcast today. I tend to, when I'm doing things like these, my brain sort of shuts down very often, and this is the first time I've been able to talk about a lot of the things that we talked about here today, and I think it's going to be really helpful for people who are interested in the EP. So I'm really, really grateful to you guys for giving me the opportunity to say a little bit about our music, and specifically about the release that we're putting out now. So thank you guys a lot for that.
Oh, of course. You're welcome back on any other time. If you want to talk about, more vague advice stuff, if you want to just come on and, shoot the shit about random music, I mean, we're always happy to have you on.
Hell yeah, man. I appreciate that. And I'll definitely be taking you up on that.
Sweet. Dante, do you have any final words to say to anybody?
If you're in Philly, in or around Philly, definitely come hang out with us April 21st. If not, everything will be available on Bandcamp and Spotify. And if you're too far away, definitely tune into that live stream. And I'm sorry if I offended any Christians.
Luckily, this podcast is on iTunes as explicit, so
there we go.
A lot of the really conservative ones are gonna, stay away from it anyway because there's cussing in it.
Right.
Well, that has been episode 4 of the Plugged In podcast. Cast.